I'm not the biggest fan of Ryan Murphy's work, but one show I can always get behind is Feud, specifically Betty and Joan. Capote versus the Swans was meh. But I think the magic of Betty and Joan could be recaptured, which is why I am officially pitching Cloris and Betty about the rivalry between Betty White and Cloris Leachman when they were filming The Mary Tyler Moore Show. In my opinion, Cloris and Betty would recapture the magic of Betty and Joan without retelling the same story. Betty and Joan is the story about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and their legendary feud that was spurred on by their bad behavior and the studio system. Cloris and Betty would be a story about two women who were pitted against each other by producers when they had no real strong opinions on the other than the fact that they thought the other was talented. The story really begins in 1972. The Mary Tyler Moore Show is a smash hit, and it's just finished its third season. Cloris Leachman is playing one of Mary Tyler Moore's oldest friends and her landlady, Phyllis Lindstrom. The character of Phyllis is not likable, and she's not supposed to be. She's oblivious and obnoxious and pretentious and rich. In 1972, Cloris Leachman won an Emmy for playing Phyllis. 1972 is also when Cloris Leachman won her Oscar for The Last Picture Show. The show was coming back for season 4, and an important thing to note is in season 5, contract negotiations would start up again. And while Hollywood always loves to diminish the accomplishments of women and how influential they are on the projects they're in, it would be very hard to argue Cloris Leachman didn't deserve a pay raise when she just won an Emmy for the show. Producers and CBS were convinced Cloris Leachman would ask for a significant pay raise when season 5 rolled around, and they were trying to figure out what they could do to not give that to her. They wrote an episode about Phyllis with a one-off character of Sue Ann Nivens. In the script, they said they wanted a Betty White type. They tried to find people, and then they eventually offered it to Betty White. The first time these two were on screen together, they worked exceedingly well. They understood each other's comedic style and timing. Betty White was so brilliant in her guest appearance that they extended an offer to her to be a series regular. While Betty White loved being on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, she was a little apprehensive because the character of Sue Ann was basically the character of Phyllis, and she was worried that it would just be taking away storylines from Cloris Leachman. That's when they told Betty White their plan. They wanted to give Sue Ann Nivens her own spin-off after about 13 or 14 episodes. The plot was going to be Sue Ann gets a nationally syndicated cooking show and moves from Minneapolis to Los Angeles. Once Betty White was brought onto the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Cloris Leachman's part was greatly diminished. As a matter of fact, Cloris and Betty appeared in very few episodes after their initial one. This was on purpose. Production did not want these two women talking to each other because if one strong, powerful, talented woman is scary, two strong, powerful women who get along is terrifying. And to make sure these two did not speak to each other and compare notes, they started to tell each other nasty things that the other was saying about them, which neither of them had ever said. After Cloris Leachman's part had been so greatly diminished on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, producers came to her and said they wanted to give her a spin-off of Phyllis. Newly widowed Phyllis moves from Minneapolis to San Francisco with her daughter Beth to live with her father. Cloris Leachman told producers this show would not work because Phyllis is not likable enough to carry a show on her own. They didn't care, and while Cloris Leachman knew Phyllis would not work, she decided to leave the Mary Tyler Moore Show because they weren't giving her screen time anyway. So instead of giving Betty White a spin-off that would have probably succeeded, and letting Cloris Leachman stay on the show she wanted to be on, producers made a fake feud between two women who would have otherwise been best friends because they didn't want to give women what they deserved. Luckily, Betty White and Cloris Leachman compared notes later in life and realized exactly what had happened and how both of them had been played. The two remained friendly until Cloris Leachman's death in 2021. For Feud, Cloris and Betty, I would cast Sandra Bullock as Cloris Leachman and Kirsten Dunst as Betty White. And unlike in Betty and Joan, these two were actually friends later in life, so you don't have to make up an ending. All right, my strange little onions, I love you. Have a hug, a cookie, and a juice box. Mwah.